Hey, it's Kate. I hope you're having a great day. What's in the garden today is tomato trellising. So these are indeterminate or vining style tomatoes. I planted them 7 weeks ago at the beginning of May, and I initially put in some bamboo stakes as a temporary solution. But since then, life has continued and I haven't been able to get back to them. I think they're growing really well. The stems are really thick, but the plants are starting to get really heavy and bulky. This one has even pulled over its stake. So I need a bigger and stronger solution for the tomatoes in both of these beds. So let me show you the plan. I made these skinny stakes from 1x4 lumber by rip cutting them. They're 8 feet long, and I'll use these to make upright A-frames. And then I have a 1x2 piece of lumber. We'll use this across the top. I've got some cotton garden twine, and I'm also going to use some screws for added strength, and I have a few tools to go with it. All right, let me get started, and this will all make sense.
As a quick refresher, there are two main styles of tomato plants: determinate or bush-style tomatoes, and indeterminate or vining-style tomatoes. And the way they produce their fruit might make you treat them differently. Determinate or bush tomatoes grow to their full size, then they produce all their tomatoes at once, and then that's it for the plant. So for these, you typically leave all the side shoots on to maximize the single harvest. And then indeterminate or vining tomatoes, like the ones I have, produce their tomatoes as they grow, like a constant stream, and they will keep growing all season until they're killed by the fall frost. Typically, it's recommended to provide 6 to 8 feet of support for them, but they can grow even taller in the right conditions. So that kind of explains why I'm using 8-foot tall stakes here, and this is a design that I came up with myself based around these stakes which I already had. So you just saw me put the A-frames together with one screw each, giving them pivot points. I could have used twine here instead, but that could slip over time, and the screws definitely won't do that. This is important because I'm going to use the top V space above the pivot point to hold the 1x2 horizontal piece across the top. Next, I hammered the stakes in with a rubber mallet, and I did some checking as I went to make sure they were all the same and they would line up. I'd like to say this went completely smoothly. It did go well, but getting the ladder in the back there for the third A-frame was a pain because the ladder is too wide for the path. Narrow paths are nice to not waste space, but they make things so difficult. Anyways, I got it figured out, so we're good. There are plenty of ways to trellis tomatoes, but I settled on one style that's fairly common for indeterminates. I designed a rigid frame including a top crosspiece all made of wood, and then I can hang garden twine from the top and wind the tomatoes around the twine as they grow. This gives them good stability spread across their whole stem. Using twine or string like this is fairly common with indeterminate tomatoes. To make it work well, the tomatoes need to be kept well pruned, usually by removing all of the offshoot suckers and keeping it trained with just one or sometimes two main stems. So the next step is to get the top horizontal piece up. But before I did that, I tied the strings on to that top piece while it was easy to reach. Then I lined up the string and placed it on top of the A-frames. I made sure it didn't look too wonky and then started tying it in with more of the twine. I tied it to each A-frame, and for some much needed stability, I tied the A-frame on the left to the house trellis and the A-frame on the right to the mini fence on the garden bed. And a couple notes on my decision-making process with these strings. I chose cotton twine because it was a bit thicker and cotton is nice and soft, which I thought would be more gentle on the tomato stems. As well, I chose to double up the string for each plant, so they would each get 2 strings acting as one. This is because I haven't used this string before and I didn't want to deal with a fallen plant in the off chance they'd be too much for the string by the end of the season. The next step is getting the tomatoes all tied in. I hadn't really figured out how I was going to secure the ends of the string before I started. There's multiple ways of doing this. If you're doing this as you plant your seedlings, you can tuck the string under the root ball as you plant. Or you could anchor the string with some type of stake like a tent peg right next to the plant. Or the option I went with is tying a loop around the stem of the plant. You do have to be careful with this that the loop isn't too tight so the plant doesn't get strangled. So I found older leaf shoots to tie under, and that seemed to work really well. And boy, I'll tell you, this would have been so much easier if the plants were smaller. Definitely better late than never, but it would have been faster and easier with smaller plants. Because of their size, I had to wrap the string around them going down and then tie to the stem. It was a pain. So this is one option for a tomato trellis, but there are so many ways of doing this. And don't feel like you have to go buy special made ones. You certainly can, but take a look at what you have laying around. In my case, I spent a whole $4 on the top 1x2, and I needed more garden twine anyways. Everything else I already had. Other ideas could be a cage-style support, which would use a lot of wood or other rigid material, or the Florida weave style, but I didn't really think that was going to work for me because these plants seemed pretty heavy already. Another option is to use lattice-style trellis and tie the plants to the grid. There really are loads of ways to support tomatoes. This is a good opportunity to use your imagination. Of course, the other option is no trellis at all and just let the plants sprawl across the ground. You need a lot of space for that, and there are other downsides too. So instead, we trellis. So as my tomatoes grow, I'll be tucking their growing tips around their string to keep them in line, and I'll also be removing the suckers. Those are the shoots that come out between the leaf branch and the main stem. Removing them will help to allow good airflow and lots of light, which will help reduce the chance of disease. As well, the suckers wouldn't be supported by the main string. I have heard the argument that these suckers will reduce your harvest. I don't really believe that. The suckers will grow tomato trusses and thus tomatoes, which is why you don't prune the suckers on determinate bush tomatoes. To maximize the harvest, cutting them reduces your harvest with a bush tomato. So why would it be different with indeterminates? Well, they can become much bigger plants, and these offshoots can quickly get out of control. So if you want to allow them to grow, you need to plan for them by providing extra space for each plant and possibly support for these side shoots too. Obviously, I didn't do that. My goal with this trellis is just to keep these plants off the ground and stop them from smothering other plants so that I can get the most out of my square footage.
I'm really happy with this. I think it turned out really well, and it should be more than strong enough for these tomatoes. I do wish that I had been able to get to it sooner, but that's not always how it goes. So for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.